Thinking about UFC 295, I'm left with a bunch of questions. I feel like 295, for better or worse, wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't. I feel like Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic is a spectacle. I don't know what it says about the division, but it was a spectacle. And instead, what we got with is more questions, which I guess is important if you're going to go forward into the UFC. But I don't know that we have many answers. So I'm going to go a little bit backwards here and talk about the heavyweights first, in the sense that I have no idea how good Tom Aspinall is. At all. I know he's good. I know he's quite good. I know that he's the champ. I also saw somebody who made a run, largely based upon popularity, specifically in England, who fought Curtis Blades and lost due to injury, not trying to complain, but beyond that, I have not seen a guy who's fought a lot of top-tier talent until he was in the championship match with Sergey Popovich. I'm saying that name wrong, I'm sure. But Sergey fought a lot of great talent, lost to Overeem, beat a who's who in terms of Blades and a bunch of other fighters, a lot of whom were getting the star treatment in a division that's really been lost for some time now. I mean, when you think about the UFC's heavyweight division, it's really gotten away from them for a while now. I mean, you had Stipe Miocic, who was dominant for a very, very long time. And then you had the Cormier debacle, where Cormier gets it and Miocic sits out from competition for about a year and a half, comes back, has a trilogy with Cormier, beats him, and then kind of sits out for a while, loses to Francis. Francis sits out for a while, beats Ciryl Gane, sits out for a while, retires, or at least leaves the promotion. Then you have Jon Jones coming up, who'd never been in the division before, fights for a championship, sits out for a while, gets hurt, sits out for a little bit longer. And again, I'm not trying to be unfair to the participants or, try and talk shit or whatever, but it's just, I feel like it's a stagnated division where, largely speaking, on the undercard, we've had most of the fights with the people who weren't Stipe, who weren't Daniel Cormier, who weren't Jon Jones. We've had all those fights. We really have. So, most of the matchups that you would think about have already happened. And I feel like the most interesting thing about Tom Aspinall is that he was really on the undercard during all of that battle royale, while all of the people who weren't fighting for the belt were fighting each other because the people who had the belt were sitting out. Aspinall missed that. So the problem I have there is everyone who was in kind of that round robin battle royale, they all took losses because they're fighting all the best. So that's then held against them for them to get future title shots, what have you. And Aspinall didn't really fight a lot of the who's who. He didn't take those losses. So I think a lot of, it's interesting in the sense that there's a lot of matchups for him. But then the question becomes, well, because he hasn't fought them, they seem like good matchups, but because those people have had losses, they're not worthy of a championship shot. There's really nobody out there outside of the Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic matchup, which I don't think he's going to get anytime soon, where you can look at that and go, yeah, I can see that as a fight. Tai Tuivasa, think he's a great fighter. He lost to Popovich, he lost to Gane. Kind of out of contention. Same thing with Gane. Gone lost to Ngannou, gone lost to Jones. He's what, 1-3 of his last 3? You know, he's like 1-2 of his last 3. Trying to put him in there for a title fight, I get why you'd want to, but I also think it's a hard sell to the viewer. My balls is hot. He's lost so much lately. He just got taken down a bajillion times by a wrestler and held there and outpointed. Say what you want about that, I just don't see him getting a title contention shot. He just lost. And that's my point. All of them have recently lost. So I feel like whatever data research the UFC has done have figured out that Jones and Stipe is going to make a ton of money. And they want to preserve that fight. So the idea of putting Stipe in there with, the current heavyweight champion, I feel like that doesn't work for them because what if Miocic loses? And now you have the young fighter versus Jones. So don't get me wrong, I feel like, of course, beating Miocic and then being able to go into Jones for the undisputed definitely leaves a interesting legacy for Aspinall if he can beat the two legends. But here's the problem with that. Let's say hypothetically he loses to Miocic. Okay, so then Miocic has a lot more rub going into the Jones fight. I'll give you that. And that makes that Jones fight a whole lot bigger. But most people don't realistically think Miocic beats Aspinall. Okay, so then you have Aspinall go into the Jones fight. So if he beats Jones, Aspinall is the guy. And it boosts heavyweight to the stratospheric level. But let's assume, for a second, that Jones beats Tom Aspinall and leaves. Like, he retires. What do you do then? Because then the problem becomes, well, who do you put the belt on now? Jones just thumped Aspinall, who's thumped everybody else. Do you just, does Aspinall lose the title in the fight, and then as soon as John Jones retires, you hand him the belt back, and you're you're the champ now? What does that do for his legitimacy? So I feel like once we know that John Jones has one fight left, and I think that's where we're going here, I don't think you can reasonably put him in there with a younger guy, because he is going to take all of the legitimacy away from him, much like he did the Daniel Cormier situation, where he beats Daniel, gets put out, and doesn't retire so much as gets suspended, but as he's suspended, Cormier becomes champ, and then it's always the asterisk of because John Jones isn't there, and then Cormier goes on a run, John Jones comes back, beats him again, it gets overturned into a no contest, and they give the belt back to Cormier. Talk about asterisk. And I'm not saying this to shit on Daniel Cormier, I'm just saying, from the perspective of doing that to the future, because let's say hypothetically, Aspinall goes up, loses to Jones. They give him the belt back, and he's the champ for the next 5 or 10 years, but it's always kind of yeah, but whatever. And then there's always the what if of Ngannou out there. However long Ngannou is out there competing, not in the UFC, there's always going to be the asterisk of, the real champ left. Now, you can say what you want about Jones in that situation, but I feel like there's a huge question mark if Aspinall is the champ, not having faced Jones, not having faced Ngannou. I feel like the asterisk champion is not what the UFC wants. So it's just an interesting play for Aspinall and what the UFC wants to do with that. Now, a lot of people have talked about, because Aspinall is going to be the now and future champion for some time, do you take the undisputed belt off of Jones, put it on Aspinall, let him defend it against whoever, put some other belt up for Jones and Stipe, the greatest heavyweight of all time belt, the BMF for heavyweights, however you want to sell the marketing gimmick here. And then you do that, because I just imagine that John Jones is going to like that. He just isn't. I don't know if he's going to go for it. Like, I'm giving up my belt because I got hurt right before I was going to defend it. I'm going to defend it the moment I get healthy. Like, that's not really fair to John. However, knowing that he's going into his next fight's a retirement fight isn't fair to the division or to the UFC or to fans. So I don't really know how you resolve that without hurting legitimacy, legacy, the division. It just looks bad from a marketing standpoint, which I think could very much so affect the people tuning in. And especially if you're going through a drama of who's the real champ, while Ngannou's out there destroying people, which I assume he will because there's no real competition where he's going, so he's just going to be flatlining people. And we don't even know who the champ is in the UFC. This doesn't look good. So you got that. Then you've got Pereira versus, oh my god, the Czech dude, whose name I can't pronounce. Prohaska. Okay. So, early stoppage aside, and Prohaska says it's not early stoppage, so I'm not going to belabor that point too much. Wow. So, like, watching him, watching Adesanya, watching the Santa Claus guy whose name I can never pronounce, fighting the Azerbaijani guy whose name I can't pronounce, I'm starting to see this twist from old UFC where wrestling doesn't matter anymore. It used to be kickboxers really didn't have much of a shot in the UFC and mixed martial arts. And now we're seeing where people who have these amazing striking skills, being able to take on wrestlers, being able to take on well-rounded guys, and destroy them. And I feel like with Pereira specifically, it's not that you can't take him down, because people have. It's that he's not looking for points. Like, Pereira, to my knowledge, has never won a fight on points. Or, excuse me, he won the Blachowicz fight on points. Excuse me, but very rarely. I think that was the only fight that we've seen in the UFC where he's won on points. So, you take him down. You don't do any damage to him because he's good enough to stop damage. He doesn't really try and stand up. But he's able to do enough damage before you take him down that it adds up and it compromises the other fighter enough to set them up for him to knock them into another dimension. What I mean by that is, I remember, looking at the person I was watching UFC with, and saying Prohaska won the first round on points. On the scorecards, I firmly believe, and I haven't looked this up to see afterwards, but I think Prohaska won the first round. But his lead leg being damaged by leg kicks, to the extent that it was, I said he won the round, but he lost the war. He's losing overall because he took more damage, and he's going to be more compromised going forward than what Pereira was, which plays into Pereira's strong suit. So even though Pereira got taken down, and he definitely lost the round for control's sake, before he was taken down, he did enough damage to ensure that there wasn't going to be explosiveness from Prohaska to take him down going forward, which was true. And more importantly, Prohaska really, really needed to do damage on the ground. Like, if it cost you that much to take him down, you needed to try submission, you needed to at least give him minor concussion or blood or something to think about as a, oh my god, I don't want to go down here again. He wasn't really able to do that. So, I feel like, looking at Pereira, the only person who's been able to really beat him is other kickboxers. So you got Izzy, who's a kickboxer, who was able to snipe him and get I'm not going to call it a lucky shot, but a very precise shot that he had to do a lot to set him up for. And two, I would argue, in my book, and I scored it the way I scored it, I think Blachowicz beat him in his first fight at light heavyweight. It was a close fight. I believe it was a split decision. I could be wrong on that one. But to my point, Blachowicz is another former kickboxer. He's a little bit more well-rounded, could take him down, could hold him there, but did so much damage on that league leg, and nobody's been able to do anything to him with that. When I really think about this card, I think the fight that most interested me, because like, to be honest with you, once Jon Jones is my favorite fighter. When he was off the card, I was kind of eh. And I was looking at the card to just see how much value there was on the pay-per-view aspect. And you got the two title fights that are, you know, both for vacated titles, so it's not as interesting for me. And then the first two fights on the card, not interesting at all. But then I saw Dern and Andrade, and I'm a huge Mackenzie Dern fan. Probably my favorite female fighter. And the problem with her is that she was so one-dimensional. So, you know, like, knowing that she doesn't have stand-up and that she's always going to be going for takedowns would really mess with her with well-rounded fighters. And it's like she did okay early on with her wrestling and her grappling and her submission skills. But as she started to get up, and I wanted to say there was the one Chinese fighter, whose name I'm never going to get right, that she lost to because, you know, she was able to take her down and put her in compromising situations, but because she couldn't actually get the submission in a 5-minute period of time where it takes, you know, it's sometimes 2 or 3 minutes to get a takedown. And then you are trying for submissions and you're doing beautiful technique, but you have to be able to get those submissions in a non-jiu-jitsu thing. Because like when you think about where Dern came from is competition jiu-jitsu. So in competition jiu-jitsu you have two ladies who are trying to submit the other one. In MMA, you don't have two people trying to submit each other. What you have is one person trying to get the submission in a very limited amount of time, and the other person just trying to not put themselves in a compromising situation for that 2 minutes so they can start the next round and try and knock her out. Or score points through punches and things of that nature, which is what happened. So then Mackenzie started improving her stand-up to the point that she outstruck Angela Hill, who is by no means a title challenger caliber fighter, but she's very experienced, she's a veteran, she's been in there with everybody, and to go in and outstrike Angela Hill is exciting. And then she was able to at least start mixing her jiu-jitsu and her takedowns with the fighting. So when you think about that, and you think about what that means for Mackenzie going forward, because she was having troubles with the upper echelon strikers and fighters, what that meant is if she could not get knocked out, not be, you know, destroyed on her feet, pieced up and outpointed on her feet while she's trying to get these takedowns from half a ring away, then if you can hit and make people afraid of your feet and your hands and your stand-up, you're going to be able to integrate the takedowns, and you're going to, and once you get on the ground, you know, she can make magic happen. That didn't happen at all in this fight. She tried to do nothing but strike with one of the best strikers in that division, in strawweight. I mean, I'm not going to say she's Nama Yunus by any means, because I think she's the best striker, but in terms of power, I think really only Weili is stronger. So while I would say Andrade has been on a bit of a losing streak and people have been able to figure her out, I feel like Dern is a really easy one to figure out. Don't let her take you down, which I feel like this idea that we've always had of grapplers being, you know, the best in MMA, the problem with that, as it relates to her and as it's related to Piera, is if they can make the takedowns difficult enough, and people can learn enough of jiu-jitsu to survive for a couple of minutes. So all you gotta do is not get taken down very early in the first round while you're still fresh and you're still whatever. If you can make it difficult enough to at least create a sweat while you're, like somebody tries to get a takedown the first, where you can at least put it off for 2 or 3 minutes, get a sweat going, and only get on the ground for the last 2 minutes of the round, you're probably okay. You're probably going to do okay. So it makes me think about, are there any truly great grapplers out there at this stage of the game? And the only ones I can think of at this stage, at this point in MMA, are the Dagestanis. You think of Islam Makhachev, you think of Khabib, and the other Nurmagomedov out of Bellator. And you look at those guys, and the one interesting part to that is, one, they all cut a tremendous amount of weight. And they all compete at fairly low weight classes, to where once they bulk up, once they rehydrate and they have all that weight, they're able to take people down. And they're able to just kind of pull people down by their pure weight and pure strength. I don't know that Mackenzie or any of the women can do that. So I just question that as a female tactic moving forward. But it's also just not something that really works at heavyweight, really works at light heavyweight, at middleweight. I just don't see wrestlers having that much success at higher weight classes anymore, because they don't have that huge size advantage. So, I don't know, that's kind of my takeaway from 295. I feel like it is, at its essence, the death of the mixed martial artist wrestler.